Good morning, everyone. I got this for my grade 12 graduation at church. So I still had it, which is kind of cool. And for some reason, my mother gave me my, like when I was dedicated in 1962 as a baby. I use it as a marker in here. I'm really glad, though, that we've moved to quilts from Bibles. Because particularly these printed ones, you kind of, when young people, like how often would they actually use them? My son the other day, Michael, many of you know Michael, he comes here quite regularly on holidays. He said to me, Dad, got $25 for it. I said, for what? He said, well, that's a Bible they gave me at church. I was decluttering. So rest assured, I think the quilt will hold far better than the value of the Bible. But just so that you know, if you're going to sell them, $25 is the going rate on Marketplace. I was surprised he could sell it. This is an interesting passage, Romans 12. I was introduced to it right then at my graduation, which is kind of part of what sparked it. But it was different for me today when I was reading it. And I want to talk today just a little bit about truth-making and the sense that we are in a world where truth is a rare commodity. And I think the sense of having a place where we can discern truth is really precious. And the argument I'm making today is that church is that place, or can be that place. In Romans 12, like if you read it, and do get a chance to go look at it, because it's fascinating. And you're just wondering, man, what were they doing? Like, what was the argument all about? And there was lots of them, and I'm kind of thinking it's just like a blurb. Like, I don't know how Paul even got all of it, because there's like 12 things at least going on in here, right? And, the things that you read that kind of help interpret the Bible, they talk about this fight going on in the congregation, and there was kind of people sort of being more right than others and all of that. And I thought that was just a fascinating way of looking at this. And here's Paul just responding. It's like everything in one chapter. And I think it's just like it's almost like sorry, we call them brain farts where I'm from. They're just kind of like letting it out and saying, this is what I'm thinking. And almost like he's adding to the argument, right? But I love this last part. And it's so relevant for us today. And he just says to them, never pay back evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all. Never take your own revenge. Beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him and her. And if he or she is thirsty, give him or her a drink. For in so doing, you will heap burning coals upon his head. Do not overcome evil by evil, but overcome evil with good. Words so relevant for today as we struggle to just understand what is going on. And as we engage in the conversations that seek truth. I think the U.S. election in particular has caused such a divide and has caused so much worry for us. And we talk about it a lot. We watch it on the news daily. And we begin to live in fear. This idea of the 51st state, when we didn't even we couldn't even rationally understand that anyone would use that term, and now it's used almost daily. And again, it evokes in us this uncertainty, this worry. The war in Ukraine is close to many of us, and the atrocities that are happening there, and maybe equally as bad, if not worse, Gaza, Israel and Palestine. And the just sort of unconscionable this sense that could this actually happen again in a civilized world? And here it is happening in front of us, and we don't know what to do. Then we have this Canadian election, right? And we're all resigned to the fact that we're going to have this kind of right-wing government that feels a lot like what we're seeing in the United States. And out of the blue, the savior arises by the name of Mark Carney and wins the election. And he speaks with such truth and such calm, and we are, as a people, we relax. I am particularly enjoyed the king coming here and reading the throne speech and just sort of thinking, what does this all mean? And what are we to think? So when it comes to a congregation, we have many places where we have these conversations, and this is special. I'm particularly grateful for the 19th hole in our Duffers golfing group. Many of us are from Rockway. The 19th hole is, there's 18 holes in golf, and the 19th is in the bar, just for those who aren't golfers. And discussions often unfold, and these are precious discussions. This time it was about the king, and I don't know exactly who started it. It could have been Herc, I'm not sure, but someone wrote a note. And then out of the blue, Ernie Regier writes, I watched the old king. I got his permission to read this. I watched the old king, though young by my standards, while on a break from the delights of Berlin in a cafe on Unter den Linden Straße. So Ernie's in Berlin, but had to jump in and make sense of the king's visit. Whether it was our setting and having just come from the DDR Museum, I have to say I was rather taken with the whole affair in Canada's former Bahnhof. The Orange King probably wasn't paying attention, but American politicals who were watching could not have missed the tone of it all compared to their king delivering a State of the Union address. Besides the festive vibe, Charles was friendly and seemingly accessible in working the room, and he said all the right things about his admiration for the outpost of his dominion. I liked the brief exchange between Charles and Senator Harder. Senator Harder, being a Mennonite, often comes up in our 19th hole discussions, somehow relating us more directly to what's going on. And watching Trudeau and Harper in animated friendly chatter certainly sent a nice signal, getting past depending on a Brit family to supply us with head of state would be a very good thing. But until we figure out, young Charles was a welcome presence. And I think sent a pretty good signal that we're not a 51st state prospect. Cheers, Ernie, and yes, live from Berlin. It's interesting because these types of conversations I have been involved in terms of social things that we've been together at our church. We were at Discovery Group. How many of you are part of Discovery Group? And Marlene was speaking there. I know it was highlighted that I was supposed to as well, but she did a fine job on her own. And there we had this presentation enjoyed by many, but afterwards there was like a spread of food laid out and coffee. And of course that took much more time than the presentation. And we broke into groups and we were talking, and there was all kinds of conversation that came up on our table. We talked about everything from mental health to world affairs to how wonderful Marlene was. And so there we were, making sense of what was going on around us. I now have, Marlene and I have joined the hospitality team, and when we have to have a meeting, we have dinner together. A lovely way to have a team. And I think maybe 5 minutes max. We planned the potluck downstairs, but it's a very good one. Lots of things decided in those 5 minutes. The rest of the time we just visited and we talked about all the things that mattered in the world and that mattered to us. And we built relationships, and in a sense we built calm with one another. Today at coffee time after church we will talk. And maybe people say, well, that is just a filler in the service. And I'm arguing it's much more than that. It's topics that we talk about what is happening in the world, come up, and we listen to each other. Of course, as a congregation, topics of concern come up more formally during sermons. Particularly meaningful me prayer requests. I find them really interesting what people ask for and what insight there is in their life and what insight there is in terms of the concerns they have in our community and in our world. And I would suggest that these gatherings, these informal gatherings, are more than idle chatter. They are a congregation engaging in truth-making. Some of you know of my struggle with the notion of church and the purpose and its time and value. Though this year I've come to value the congregation and feel that it's playing an important role in my life. And I know that, Henry, you ask us to separate curling and church, like state and church, but curling and church, and I do, but I just beg your forgiveness here, because one of the great moments for me of church is when Henry or Dennis will send an email and saying, I want to talk about this. And of course, then we all have an early beer. Well, we're done by 12. And we sit around and we talk. Sometimes we reminisce about a friend who's passed away. But we talk about the world and we learn from one another and we share with one another what's important to us. And that is particularly meaningful, and it is a place that very few have in this world. And it is particularly more relevant at a time of fear. I always, as I've talked about the prayer requests, feeling the same way there. The primary purpose of the talk that I wanted to give today, and when I was talking to Thomas about it, was to recognize that we as a people in congregation are fortunate to have one another. And that we are organized in a way that we talk to each other. Talk in many ways. Sometimes language doesn't come easily for some, but we talk with one another in a variety of ways. And in doing so, we care for one another. The congregation is a place where truth-making happens, and this is important. A congregation, according to my good friend ChatCPT, is a group of people gathered for a common purpose, especially for religious worship in a church or similar place. It can also refer to the act of congregating or collecting together. Truth-making describes the way truths are linked to objects, states of affairs, or other entities in the world, which in turn describe the truth of a proposition. So in other words, it's a group of people discerning together what is truth. And then by having those congregations, truth arises. And that truth may be different for each one of us. But the more important thing on this one is the journey than the destination. And I find it again beautiful here that I've never felt the need to defend my truth. It's just my truth. It's no more. And you have yours. And that's a beautiful thing. But like Ernie writing to us from the cafe in Berlin, promoting the meaning of the King's visit to Canada, and the way that helps us to discern things, it builds a sense of belonging and community. About 10 years ago, I spent 5 years writing a book called Deepening Community, Finding Joy Together in Chaotic Times. And I was trying to understand not only the value of community, but also to consider how community itself was built. And there were 4 discoveries. The first one was just this simple notion of that you build community by knowing one another. And we talked a lot about knowing each other's story and how important that is. Second one, which is strange because it was 98% of the 500 people who I interviewed talked about the value of having fun together. It's interesting, huh? Of all the ways to sort of do something important in your life, having fun with other people could be one of the most important. Learning to care for one another, finding different ways for us to reach out, to hear each other's story, to care for others when they're not well, or even when they're well, to celebrate like we did today and showing caring there. And then one of the most important one was this sense that we rise together and we begin to do things to make the world a better place. I wrote, community can help shape our identity as a collective and interdependent people. It creates the opportunity for us to care for and about others, and in turn, to be cared for. The key interaction that builds a sense of belonging. When we belong and enjoy strong relationships with one another, we can rely on one another in both good and difficult times. This makes us more resilient and makes us healthier. To deepen community is to find opportunities for ongoing connection with those we care about and those who care about us. The fact that we meet regularly is what makes us a special community. It's what makes faith community so important. This connection strengthens the bonds between us. It builds an emotional resilience within and between us that in turn builds mutuality and reciprocity. We begin to open ourselves up to receive and give. Mutual acts of caring become the basis of an ever stronger feeling of belonging. I often wonder if the only way, and this is, I was surprised to find this in my book, because it really spoke to me in these times. I often wonder if the only way we can ever transcend the collective evil we endure as people is to do good together. Maybe loving our enemy and repaying harm with good is the only way to achieve a true healing and in turn joy. My good friend Peter Block, a prolific author, wrote a book called Community that really inspired me. And he calls community the structure for belonging. In the sense, by being together, we have this sense that we belong here. And he proposes that when a people meet regularly over a long period of time, they build meaning together. And through this meaning making, they find belonging. And in a sense, truth. I want to end just with a little story, because I was struggling to figure out how to make this practical, but I think I found something. So Marlene and I were having dinner with Ann Schultz. How many of you know Ann? And Steve Feitzer, or Fitzner. And Ann brought up the game called Hygge. Hygge. Anybody played Hygge? Nobody's played Hygge. Okay. Did we have one there? Okay, well, it's an interesting game. Let me continue, because I had to figure out what Hygge actually meant, and Anne kind of explained it, but then we got off topic and we went on to something else. But I was so intrigued by this because the practice of Hygge, I think, can serve us well as a congregation, and you will see why that is in a moment. The Hygge principle, pronounced Hygge, right, just like I'm saying it instead of Hygge, it's spelled H-Y-G-G-E, is a Danish concept that encompasses a feeling of cozy contentment and well-being through enjoying the simple things in life. It's about creating a warm atmosphere, enjoying the good things with good people. Although there's no direct English translation, it's often associated with coziness, comfort, and togetherness. The key elements of the Hygge principle. These are the applications. Comfort. Creating beautiful spaces where we feel comfortable. Interestingly enough, you will see downstairs tablecloths, cutlery, a napkin, a cup, at each table setting. And yesterday, as we were setting the table with all of our good friends here at Rockway on the committee, we had a long debate about whether those things should be added or not. And those who were lazy like me said, oh, come on, we don't really need those. But they wanted to create that sense of warmth, and they won out. And yes, we set up the tables for you. So comfort is an interesting part, creating those beautiful spaces like we do just here on Sunday morning. Togetherness. So it's like the quality time that we have with each other. Shared meals is a big deal in Huga. The potluck is an example of that. Simplicity. Comfort, togetherness, simplicity. Enjoying the moment rather than seeking constant stimulation or even meaning, you know. Slowing down, being mindful, and savoring small pleasures like meeting together on Sunday morning. Coffee after discovery group, or the 19th hole after golf. Warmth. Just creating that sense of warmth, similar to comfort, but different. And then mindfulness, being present and appreciating the now. Huga is especially emphasized in the colder months, but can be embraced year-round. It is a major reason Denmark often ranks as one of the happiest countries in the world. These are colder months. These are the colder times with all the disinformation in our world. As a congregation, we would be wise to value that we have each other. Let us value the times we slow down and seek truth together. Enjoy your potluck today.